My name is Paul Zarbach. I'm a staff member with the University of North Carolina at Wilmington's Randall Library. Today is the 28th of October in the year 2003, and we're videotaping at the Zimmerman home in St. James Plantation, North Carolina. We are interviewing today Dr. Harvey Hatchfield.
Yes.
And I'm going to start off in the usual way by saying, sir, what events led you into the military? How old were you? What was the date? And tell me a story. How in the world did a nice guy like you end up in the military?
Well, I got into the military in a very straightforward fashion. World War II started. In December of '42, when the war started, I was in college at the University of Virginia. I was a pre-med student. I'd already been accepted in medical school, and I had planned to go on and become a doctor. Well, when we got back from Christmas vacation of 1942, there were recruiters all over the campus looking for soldiers. And the recruiters made quite a point of telling those of us who were ready to go to medical school that the Army needed doctors a hell of a lot more than they needed foot soldiers. So they told us to stay in school, become physicians, and then take our turn in the service. They commissioned me when I graduated in June of '42. They commissioned me as a second lieutenant in the Medical Administrative Corps as a reserve officer.
When you say graduated, you mean, am I correct, you mean with an undergraduate degree?
Yes, I had a Bachelor of Arts degree from the university, and I graduated from college June 10th.
University of
Virginia. And started medical school June 28th the same year in New York City.
And what was the name of the medical school?
New York Medical College, and there I was as a civilian, but as a reserve second lieutenant. In July, I think it was, of 1943, the Army came up with a ASTP, Army Student Training Program, and they took away my commission and made me a PFC on active duty in uniform. So they sent us to Camp Upton on Long Island for something like 4 or 5 days for basic military instruction.
What was the logic behind this corkscrew maneuver?
Ask the politicians, don't ask me. I was a medical student. I mean, I started medical school at the age of 20, graduated at the age of 23, and I didn't have time to discuss things with politicians because they took away all our vacations. All we did was work. In addition, our clinical work in medical school was overwhelming because all the doctors had gone, or most of the doctors had gone into the service, and we were functioning as, ward clerks, as interns really, taking care of more patients than we knew how to handle since there weren't enough doctors around. Well, so I went through the ranks as a PFC. We were organized in the Army as a company, and we all had various duties. I had gone to military school, for prep school, so they made me first sergeant of this company, which I tried to perform as best I could. When I graduated from medical school in June of '45, they commissioned me as a second lieutenant in the reserve again so that I could get my internship, which had been curtailed from a year to 9 months.
This is certainly a yo-yo career on your part.
Back and forth. Well, after my 9-month internship in April of '46, they sent me to Camp Joseph T. Robinson outside of Little Rock, Arkansas, where I served as a ward doctor for 2 months before they found room for me at the Medical Field Service School in San Antonio, Texas. So I went there for the delightful months of July and August. And those months in Central Texas are not happy times. The temperature is high. We were in our woolen uniforms doing close order drill and calisthenics and all that. And we were trained then to be medical officers. When I finished that, they gave me, I think, a week or 10 days of leave, and then I had to report to Camp Stoneman in California, where they shipped me out to, we didn't know where. I went with 2-foot lockers of clothing, one for warm weather, one for cold weather. They didn't tell us where we were going until we got on the ship.
What date was that, sir?
That was, I guess,
month and year is good.
September of '46. And we wound up going to the Philippines on a troop ship called the General Brewster. They put me in command of a hold, it really was, with 1,000 soldiers in it, and we set sail for Manila. It was 21 days on the ocean with this. I commanded 1,000 troops, and I think 900 of them were seasick, which didn't make for a very happy event below decks.
So you are now a first lieutenant?
I'm a first lieutenant.
In the medical corps, was it called?
I'm an Army doctor.
Okay.
We stopped in Guam overnight for provisions and fuel and such, and then went on to Manila. And I arrived there, I guess it was late September '46, and I told them I wanted, we went through personnel to be assigned. They said, where do you want to go? I said, oh, I'd like to go to the 4th General Hospital in Manila, a nice big hospital. Okay, so I wound up as a battalion surgeon with the 342nd Infantry Regiment, part of the 86th Division. And they were stationed at that time in a town called Marikina in central Luzon, about 45-minute jeep ride over shell-pocked roads to Manila. The regiment, I don't know how they're arranged today. A regiment in those days consisted of 3 companies, and each company, they were triangular divisions, they called them.
Was it company or battalion?
Well, there were 3 platoons to a company, 3 companies to a battalion, 3 battalions to a regiment.
Okay.
Plus assorted support units,
Sure.
motor pools, ammunition supply, quartermaster units and such. But the basic units were the infantry troops. And as part of regimental headquarters, there was a medical company, 3 platoons, each platoon commanded by a doctor, a medical officer. And a regimental surgeon was the chief doctor for the regiment. So my duties there were to command my medical platoon and to provide basic medical care for the soldiers.
What were there? What was the start that again. What would you do on an average day? Run a sick call in the morning? Or?
I'd run a sick call in the morning for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever, take care of the usual ailments, which in the Philippines were dysentery, malaria, venereal disease, and respiratory infections and such. Anything of any consequence we had to ship back to Manila anyway. We had very basic medical facilities. The rest of the time was spent training. Since the war had just recently ended, most of the training was still based on wartime activities, training medical soldiers, enlisted men, combat casualty care, evacuation, things of this sort, first aid procedures, because as a battalion surgeon, we didn't treat much other than first aid type measures.
What were living conditions like? Were you sleeping under canvas?
Yeah, we were in a tent. Officers had luxurious accommodations, 4 officers to a tent, a squad tent. Enlisted men were 8 to a tent. 8 was a squad.
Did you have boards on the floor, or was it dirt?
We were in good shape. We had boards on the floor and bamboo on the sides below the screens.
Mosquito bars to keep over your...
Well, yeah, we had mosquito bars, but everybody got malaria anyway. We were all taking Atapirin, which turned your skin yellow and didn't protect you too well against malaria. So most of the soldiers had malaria. I had it too. Sanitary facilities, we had the usual Army latrines with a row of holes cut in wooden boards. That was the latrine. We rigged up a system of water coming down from a stream, and you pull the chain to open it up and it would flush all 8 latrines at one time. If you wanted a shower, if you wanted warm water, in late afternoon the water tower had been warmed by the sun, you got a warm shower. You want a cool shower, you went in the morning when it was cool. The food was horrible. Whatever food we got was what came in on the last ship, and we'd have the same food 2 or 3 times a day until the next ship came in.
For example, what would be a
We had
characteristic menu?
canned ham, canned vegetables. Our mess facilities, we made our own bread, but the butter was tropical butter, which had the consistency of rubber. And
Powdered milk?
powdered milk, powdered eggs, oh yeah. Yeah, these were field rations. We were, 45 minutes out of Manila. And then we'd get canned beef or canned poultry. It was very hard to keep food in good shape in the tropics in those days. Our regiment became a cadre for training a Philippine Scout regiment. So they were taking over our garrison duties when we left. So the 342nd Infantry became the 44th Infantry Philippine Scouts, PS. And I was very impressed with the dedication of the Philippine soldiers. They were good. They worked hard. They wanted to succeed. They wanted to be good soldiers. And they really worked at it. One couple of things that helped were the Philippine sergeants I had assigned to me. One of them had been through the death march on Bataan, and he wouldn't put up with any nonsense. Sergeant Reyes was old school Army, and boy, no nonsense when he was around. So they worked real hard. We did have time to do a few things here and there. We used to go into Manila every couple of weeks for a little R&R, a day off to get some decent food. And
what did Manila have to offer a guy on R&R?
well, Manila...
You may want to be a little cautious on that response.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but that's not what I was interested in. Manila had been bombed by the Japanese. It had been bombed by the Americans. It had been shelled by both sides. When I was there, most of the buildings were a wreck. The Philippine Parliament building, I have pictures of it, but one whole side of it collapsed. All the bridges in Manila had been bombed and burned, and the only bridges, there were 7 rivers going through Manila. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So they needed a lot of bridges. Most of the bridges were Bailey bridges that had been constructed by the Army. And
Bailey bridges being?
They were prefab units that were hooked together to cross the rivers. And they were strictly military bridges, and they could handle Army equipment and trucks and such, but I don't think they had much in the way of pedestrian facilities. But anyway, so in Manila we could get a decent meal. We could get, decent booze. One interesting thing you might find interesting. The Officers Club at the 86th Division headquarters was a place where we liked to pick up British officers in Manila and take them back to the Officers Club. Because above the bar in the Officers Club was this large British coat of arms, probably about 8 feet long. And the story of that was that it had been in the British Officers Club in Singapore. The Japanese captured it and brought it back to their headquarters in Manila. The 8th Army came in, took over in Manila. The 86th Division took over in Manila and captured this thing from the Japanese Officers Club in Manila and put it above the bar of the Officers Club in the 86th Division in Marikina, this little town in the jungle. So we used to enjoy bringing British officers back from Manila to see this thing in our bar. What else would you like to know?
Back on the average activity when you're training the Filipino Scouts.
Right.
What about morale and what about recreation while you're out there in the boonies?
Recreation? It wasn't much. It was unsafe to go out at night because we had a lot of Japanese soldiers who were still not convinced the war was over. We had the Huck guerrillas, the communists that were shooting at us. I only got shot at 3 times, thank you, but it's enough to let me know I don't like it. The Huck Hucks would come down from the mountains every once in a while to raid local villages. The villagers didn't like it because they would steal food, pigs, chickens, whatever they had, and they would also kidnap some of the women to take back with them. So when the villagers found out the Hucks were coming down, we were not allowed to engage in combat because the war was over. So the villagers would tell us the Hucks were coming, and we would send our division artillery out for practice. With timed fire, air bursts, spray the area with shrapnel. That would discourage the guerrillas, and they wouldn't leave for a while. They'd come back a month or 2 later, and we'd go through the same routine again, artillery practice, to get rid of them. Well, after several months of this, I got transferred to headquarters outside of Manila, Quezon City. For some weird reason, they made me Assistant Chief of Preventive Medicine for AFWESPAC, Armed Forces Western Pacific. And
that's an enormous geographical area.
It is. And the preventive medicine section, I found out, was very interesting. What we did was check health reports, annual physicals, statistical health reports, venereal disease reports. This was my job. And I didn't care much for that. Since I was a doctor, I wanted to take care of patients. And here I am with headquarters duties, and it's all paperwork.
Doing a sort of a public health function, as it were,
well,
assembling data and...
Public health functions were part of the military medical officer's duties.
By the way, to whom were you to report these data? If you put together the VD
Surgeon
counter.
General in AFWESPAC. We provided all these reports to him.
And what would he do?
Damn fine. But the preventive medicine section consisted of myself and a lieutenant colonel. And the colonel, gave me all the work to do so he could go out to the golf course.
What was your rank?
My rank?
Yes.
I was the first lieutenant, but shortly after getting to headquarters, they promoted me to captain. One of the perks of working at headquarters.
But the other guy's a lieutenant colonel, right?
The other guy was the lieutenant
I
colonel.
got it.
That was the whole section. Well, I didn't care much for that. So after about 4 months of that, I found out there was a vacancy for a doctor to go up to Japan. I had some friends at headquarters, and I wangled the transfer. They didn't like my leaving headquarters because they thought I was doing a good job, and I didn't care for it. So I wangled this transfer to Japan. They put me on a hospital ship, a Navy hospital ship, to go from Manila to Yokohama. And boy, that was luxury. That was the fanciest living and eating I'd had in all my military career. It was just delightful. In addition, the hospital ship didn't have any patients, and they were well staffed with nurses. So for a young guy in his, what was I then, early 20s, mid 20s,
This is a cruise. This is not a trip.
So I get up to Japan, and now I guess it was early 47. They'd still done very little rebuilding. Most of the waterfront area in Tokyo and Yokohama was still bombed and burned out. There were a few buildings here and there, like MacArthur's headquarters, the Daiichi building in Tokyo had not been bombed. There was a brewery that had not been bombed, I don't know why. So there were a few buildings around, but not too many. I was assigned to the 4th replacement depot in a town called Zama. It later became Camp Zama, but when I was there, it was a replacement depot. And I was the only medical officer on the post, so that made me quite a big shot. I took care of everybody, and the 4th replacement depot was where all the troops into Japan came to be processed. You were one of them. So I had, my job there was taking care of mostly sick soldiers, which was very nice. I was a doctor, I wanted to take care of patients. And I had the usual public health duties. I had to inspect the sanitary facilities, the mess hall, the food supplies, and all that sort of thing. But much of it was medical care, and that's what I wanted to do. It was a very nice post for the permanent officers who were stationed there. We had Japanese waitresses at the mess hall and traditional Japanese clothing and all. And it was very nice. I had a very nice dispensary. I found out that the janitor the Japanese janitor that had been assigned to me had been a lab technician at a hospital in Tokyo during the war. So using the usual approach to collecting things in the Army, I managed to acquire some laboratory equipment, set up my own lab. So I didn't have to send everybody into Tokyo or Yokohama for, simple lab work.
How about a quick lesson in geography? Zama is where relative to Tokyo and relative to Yokohama?
Well, in those days it was about a 45-minute Jeep ride from Tokyo and Yokohama. Tokyo and Yokohama are side by side.
Okay, it's the Minneapolis-St. Paul of Japan.
Pretty much.
Okay.
On the bay, and we were up toward the mountains.
Okay.
So that was very nice, and I got friendly with some of the Japanese, and they were very happy to be friendly with us because we were a good sauce of coffee, chocolate, cigarettes. I did get to see one facility in, I guess it was in Yokohama. Penicillin was in very short supply, and it was all reserved for the military. There was a big black market in penicillin. So I went to see this facility they had in Yokohama where they were making their own penicillin. They had rack after rack of these glass jars that they were growing the mold. Penicillium notatum is the mold from which penicillin is extracted. And they would extract the penicillin from the liquid that the bacteria grew in. That was how it was done in those days. One other thing I did, I would hold sick call every once in a while. For a while it was once a week, but later it was not, for children at a Japanese school near Zama. And I saw child after child after child who had rheumatic heart disease. They would get these strep infections, and strep infections would lead to rheumatic heart disease. And here were these kids who needed penicillin, and there wasn't any for the Japanese public. So we couldn't treat them. And these kids had heart murmurs of various kinds. There was nothing I could do about it. I had no way to treat them. There were no medicines available for the Japanese public. I've often wondered what happened to those kids later on. But anyhow, we had a good time there. It was pleasant duty, nice and easy. Had a little time off. One time, 4 of the officers at the post decided we would climb Mount Fuji. So we went to climb Fujiyama, and it took us, I guess, the better part of 2 days to climb to the top. Spent a night at one of the stops on the way that was manned by Japanese monks. One of our officers, a medical administrative officer, couldn't make it to the top. A heavy smoker. Fujiyama is over 12,000 feet high. Air is kind of thin, and heavy smokers couldn't quite handle the lack of oxygen. So we dropped him off on the way, picked him up on the way down. What other things did we do? I don't know, what else do you want from me?
When you said you were treating patients at Zama, I went through, I came overseas, landed and was processed through Zama, so there would be possibly a few thousand military people who arrive at one time.
Right.
Were some of these your patients?
Yeah, the ones who were sick would come into my dispensary.
Now, what kind of sicknesses would be presented to you?
In addition to the ones I had seen in the Philippines.
Yeah.
All kinds of things. But then again, it was largely minor trauma. I used to see a lot of dislocated shoulders. We had gravel pathways from one area to another, and if the soldiers would run on these gravel pathways, they'd trip or slip, fall with their arms out, dislocate their shoulders. I'd treat a couple of dislocated shoulders a week. So it was kind of...
That's a Guinness Book of Records type phenomena.
Amazing. But minor trauma, infections of various kinds, everything from respiratory infections to prostate infections to rectal infections, all kinds of things. And that's about the way I handled it. Then toward December of 47, I found out we were being able to get home. So, and since I had a friend down at headquarters in Tokyo, I was able to get on the next ship out, which was the Admiral Mayo. And we went from Yokohama to Seattle in mid-December. The Great Circle route goes through the Aleutians. We didn't see the sun for 9 days. And the ship was pitching and rolling, and it was just, everybody aboard was seasick again. Only 2 of us made every meal, and the stewards and the officers' mess used to come to us and beg us to have more food. Have another steak, we're going to get reprovisioned when we get back to Seattle, and we don't want to have to get rid of all this stuff or dump it. Have more food. Well, so I lived well on that ship. It was a Navy troop ship, and they are much better.
There you go, Navy.
Much better than the Army troop ships.
Well, you were carrying troops back on this?
Oh yeah, we carried troops back. So I arrived at Fort Lewis, outside of Seattle, in December. Got processed. They wanted me to stay in the reserve, but I thought that was very funny. I'd had enough of that. And got home December 19th, 1947. And my wife, excuse me, my wife-to-be met me at the airport, along with her family and my family. We had become engaged the night before I left to go overseas. So we were very happy to see each other.
Where did you deplane? You were...
Well, after stopping along the way, we finally deplaned at LaGuardia Airport. I lived in Long Island. We lived in Great Neck then. So we deplaned in LaGuardia.
This is not a military transport.
Oh, no.
Civilian.
I wasn't going to wait for a military transport. Got home. My wife-to-be met me. We got married 3 months later. And we're still married 55 years later. My only other military experience, I have papers about it here. After I finished my specialty training at Columbia Presbyterian in New York, I went to St. Luke's Hospital in New York City. And while we were there in the office one time, Frank Berry, who later authored the Berry Plan when he was Surgeon General of the United States, came into the office and said, I need a consultant for the First Army at Fort Jay in Governor's Island. He says, how would you like to be my consultant? I didn't know anything about being a consultant to the Army, but I said, sure. So Frank Berry got me appointed consultant to the Surgeon General, First Army, Fort Jay. And I stayed in that thing. I'd go over there every once in a while just to check out their facilities. And I knew the anesthesiologist who was in charge of their little hospital. So it was mostly a social visit. There wasn't much I could do in the way of military care because this guy was a good doctor, knew how to handle things. And in '56, I left New York to go to New Jersey to practice, and then, so I resigned my appointment as consultant to the First Army.
And remained in private practice after that?
Pretty much, yes. And now I live in St. James in beautiful Southport, North Carolina, and I am retired. At age 81, I think I'm entitled to be retired.
Indeed, indeed. Before we went on camera, I should have mentioned one of the curious things about this activity with you today is that through the miracle of electronics, you will never be a day older than you are today. You know, you really are frozen in time. I keep thinking, for example, of ex-President Kennedy as being 40 years of age. Well, he'd be in his 80s now, if alive.
Yeah.
So one of the gifts that you're making is that years and years from now, your children and your grandchildren, and possibly your great-grandchildren, will hear your voice and see your gestures and hear your comments as I have right now. So with that, issue number 2, would you look right in the camera and address the future? Talk to your grandchild, you say?
Yeah, I have one grandchild.
Son, daughter, what?
My daughter's son, his name is Perry Tunick Hatchfield. My daughter has kept her maiden name. Her husband is a pediatrician, Mitchell Tunick. They live in Boston. Perry is now 9 years old. He's a great soccer player, and he loves science, and maybe one day he'll become a physician like his father and his grandfather.
What would you tell your grandson
What would I tell Perry?
about your military experience and
Well,
all of the scenes and sights and smells and sounds that you experienced?
being in the military was, for me, a fascinating experience. I got to see and do a lot of things I would never have done otherwise. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't. The military is a great educational experience, was for me, but I really did not feel that it was my kind of life. It wasn't what I wanted to do. Did it because I had to. There were things to do that needed doing. We did them, but it's not the kind of life I would have chosen for myself.
What did you learn from observing the destruction of property and the killing of human beings?
Well, I learned that there has to be a better way to handle problems than destroying things. Does that make me a pacifist? I don't know, maybe. Sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do and don't like to do. But I like to think there are better ways. Harry, good luck to you. Getting emotional.
You deserve it. Thank you, sir. Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
No, don't think so.
It's a privilege to have met you.
Thank you for having me.